Hi, Gary here. You know, isn't it the American dream to have a better life for our children and our grandchildren? You know, I know most of us want that. But one of the things that's happened in the country over the last century is we have this thing where businesses go from rice paddies to rice paddies, as well as wealth, in 3 generations. And that's a worldwide phenomenon. Here we call it shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So it's an 80% failure rate by the time you get to 3 generations that the wealth is gone and burned up. You know, with all the Paris Hiltons of the world and so forth, you see this real aberrant behavior. And nobody wants this. So what it comes down to is starting for a long-term transition with children or grandchildren at the very beginning. Now, in 1920, John Rockefeller Jr. wrote a 14-paragraph letter to his son, John Rockefeller III. And in here, he had very intentional rules about accountability and adherence to how his son is going to handle money, wealth, and everything that goes with it. And it's interesting because that families continued to do that over many years, and they've not had that 3-generational failure rate of 80% by going through it. So what was that all about? Well, I think what he understood was it's about, first, awareness of this issue. Number 2, how are you going to address it, and what are the issues relevant to it? And one of the very first things you find out is that the education has to start young. You want to start with children. Now, I mentioned that John Rockefeller, but there's the Observer that we wrote back in March. If you want to look at this link here, we'll go through that first part of education of children very well. So if you want to look at that, you'll see how this ties in. But we're looking at transitioning businesses or a lot of wealth to adult children. And they could be, you know, well into their 50s or 60s by the time they actually take this stuff over. So we're looking at a very, very long transition, multi-generational, 1 to 2 generations of time that takes place. And it really comes down to teaching them about 3 things again: the balance sheet, the cash flow, and taxes, having those elements down. So how do you do that? Well, it's a matter of getting them involved in your wealth at some point where you feel comfortable in doing that. Well, how do you, where, how, when? Well, they could come to meetings that you have with your advisors about various things in the financial, estate, or tax arena. They can get copies of statements. They can be on board of directors, or you can have a little family company meeting. You know, a family company could be just your wealth. It doesn't have to mean you have a company per se. But it's very important to get them involved, because over time they'll start to pick these things up. You're trying to pass along the leadership torch to them, and in the process they're going to take that wealth and do something different, most likely than you will. That's why we had this big failure rate, because many times the first generation is trying to get the second generation to do it the same way, and it can't be the same way. Just look at the changes over the last 30 years. Technology and everything else has changed so much, there's no way you're going to see this same thing happening. So it's more of an educational process through providing them information, on-the-job training on everything about wealth. Now, if you're wondering how to do this, then talk to your most trusted advisor and ask him or her how you might be able to bring them into meetings that you have periodically, or how to get them copied on statements, or how to get them onto boards of directors, or anything else that might be somewhat related to your family wealth or your company or whatever it happens to be. But this very long transition starts very early and goes for multiple generations. And it will end up, hopefully, for most of us, having a better life for our children and grandchildren, along with the wealth that comes with it. That's the whole idea. I think that's the point of, you know, why we want our money to be passed along anyway. And it's important for all of us that there's this prudence that takes place with money, and the responsibility comes with it. So until next time, enjoy.